They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you how it burns when it turns to desire. I was their sister, their little bird, until the night we decided that being family wasn't enough. Some lines aren't just crossed, they're set on fire, leaving you with a hunger that no one else can ever satisfy. Hello, everyone. My name is Elena. I've spent a long time trying to find the words to tell this story, or perhaps I've spent a long time trying to run away from it. Every time the memory resurfaces, it's like a heavy stone settling in the pit of my stomach. It's a chapter of my life I wish I could rewrite, a shadow I wish I could step out of, but the past is a stubborn thing. It stays. This all began a decade ago. I was 18, living in a sprawling, sun-drenched villa on the outskirts of Florence, Italy. To anyone looking in from the outside, my life was a masterpiece. My father was a titan in the world of high-end real estate, a man who commanded rooms with a single glance. My mother was a celebrated architect, a woman who saw the world in angles and elegance. They provided everything: the best schools, the finest clothes, a life of absolute comfort. But their success came with a price: their absence. They were often traveling, leaving the vast, echoing halls of our home to be filled by me and my two older brothers, Marcus and Julian. Marcus and Julian were twins, 2 years my senior. If my parents were the architects of my life, my brothers were the guardians of my heart. They were identical in a way that felt uncanny, though their personalities were two sides of the same coin. Marcus was the stoic one, the strategist. Julian was the fire, the one who laughed the loudest. From the time I could walk, they were my world. They didn't just love me as a sister. They curated my existence. If I was sad, they knew before I even shed a tear. If I was lonely, they were there to fill the silence. I remember being 12 years old. A group of girls at school had been relentless, mocking the way I spoke or the way I looked. I came home one afternoon, my face red and eyes swollen from crying. I didn't have to say a word. Marcus took my bag, and Julian knelt in front of me, wiping my tears with the sleeve of his sweater. The next day, they both showed up at the school gates. They didn't use violence. They didn't have to. They stood there, tall and imposing, their expressions cold and unyielding. They spoke to those girls' parents and the principal with a chilling maturity that silenced the bullying forever. They were my heroes, my protectors, my everything. As I grew older, that bond only tightened. We were a unit, a closed circuit that no one else could enter. On warm Italian evenings, when the sun dipped below the cypress trees, we would sit on the terrace. I would always wedge myself between them, their arms draped over my shoulders. They called me their little bird, swearing that as long as they were alive, nothing would ever hurt me. At 18, I was navigating the awkward transition into womanhood. I struggled with my reflection, feeling out of place in my own skin. Julian was the one who taught me how to walk in heels, laughing as I stumbled, while Marcus would sit me down and tell me, with absolute gravity, that I was the most beautiful girl in Italy. They were my emotional anchors. When my parents were away, which was often, Marcus and Julian were the ones who helped me with my studies, drove me to the coast, and stayed up with me when I couldn't sleep. I used to think that kind of love was pure. I didn't realize that when a bond is that tight, it can eventually start to suffocate the very people it's meant to protect. The change didn't happen overnight. It was a slow creep, like a vine growing over a wall until you can no longer see the bricks. Because I was the youngest, I was impulsive. I was physically affectionate in a way that felt natural to me. I would jump onto their laps when they were reading or throw my arms around their necks from behind. To me, they were just Marcus and Julian. I didn't see the boundaries that society expected us to keep. I didn't see the danger in being so close. It was a sweltering Saturday in July. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the drone of cicadas. I walked into the main living area, rubbing the sleep from my eyes after a late afternoon nap. Marcus and Julian were sprawled on the oversized leather sofa, their eyes glued to the television. I didn't think twice. I walked over and squeezed myself into the small space between them, resting my head on Marcus's shoulder and draping my legs across Julian's lap. "What are we watching?" I asked, my voice still thick with sleep. Neither of them answered immediately. They both seemed tense, their bodies unusually rigid. I looked at the screen. It wasn't one of the action movies they usually favored. It was a French art film, intense, atmospheric, and deeply romantic. In that moment, the two leads were locked in an embrace that was far more than a simple hug. It was raw, passionate, and undeniably adult. I felt a flush creep up my neck. I should have moved. I should have made a joke and walked away. But I stayed. I was curious, caught in the gravity of the scene. In the silence of the room, I felt Julian's hand shift. My own hand was resting near his pocket, and as I moved to adjust my position, I felt something, a heat, a tension, that made my heart stop. It was a physical manifestation of a feeling I didn't understand, or perhaps a feeling I wasn't supposed to acknowledge. The air in the room suddenly felt like it had been sucked out. I looked up at Marcus, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my protector. I saw a man who was looking at me with a confusion and a longing that mirrored my own. "Elena," Marcus whispered, his voice sounding like gravel. "Don't look, little bird," Julian said, his hand covering my eyes, but his touch was trembling. I laughed, but the sound was nervous, high-pitched. "I'm not a child anymore, Julian. I'm 18. I tried to pull his hand away, teasing him, but the playful atmosphere was gone. It had been replaced by a heavy, magnetic pull. My heart was thundering against my ribs. The realization that my brothers were men, and that they saw me as a woman, hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I scrambled up, my face burning. I need to go. I forgot I had to call a friend." I fled to my room, slamming the door and leaning against it. My breath came in ragged gasps. I told myself it was an accident. I told myself I was imagining the tension. But the image of Marcus's eyes and the heat of Julian's touch stayed with me, a brand on my memory. For the next few hours, I stayed in my room. I told myself I wouldn't go down for dinner, but my stomach had other plans. I also hated the idea of them thinking I was scared or embarrassed. We were a team. We didn't have secrets. When I finally ventured out, the house was quiet. I tiptoed toward the kitchen, hoping to grab a snack and retreat, but as I passed the living room, I saw them. They were standing by the large window, silhouetted by the moonlight. "Looking for something, Elena?" Marcus's voice came from the shadows. I jumped, letting out a small gasp. They both stepped forward, and to my relief, they were smiling. It was the old smile, the one that made me feel safe. "You scared me," I said, hitting Julian playfully on the arm. "We were just waiting for you," Julian said, ruffling my hair. "We thought you disappeared for good." The tension from the afternoon seemed to have evaporated. We laughed, we ate dinner, and we talked about the upcoming summer. I convinced myself that I had made a mountain out of a molehill. They were my brothers. Nothing could change that. But the universe has a strange way of testing our boundaries. The following morning, I woke up early. The walls of our villa were thick stone, but the doors were old wood, and sounds traveled through the hallway with surprising clarity. My room was sandwiched between theirs. At first, I thought the sound was the wind, or perhaps the television again. But as I sat up, the noise became distinct. It was the sound of heavy breathing, of muffled voices, and a rhythmic thudding against the wall. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew what those sounds were. I wasn't a child, but hearing them coming from Marcus and Julian's shared space sent a jolt of electricity through me. It was inappropriate. It was wrong to listen. And yet, I found myself drawn to the door. I walked into the hallway, my bare feet silent on the cold marble. The sounds grew louder. It wasn't just a movie. It was them. They were talking low, urgent whispers that I couldn't quite make out, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a private moment, a side of them I had never been privy to. I should have walked away. I should have gone to the kitchen and made coffee. Instead, I stood there, my hand hovering over the handle of their door. Curiosity is a dangerous thing. It can lead you into rooms you aren't meant to enter. The door wasn't fully latched. It creaked open a fraction of an inch. I saw them. They weren't watching a film. They were sitting on the edge of the bed, facing each other, the air between them thick with the same forbidden energy that had filled the living room the day before. They looked up as the door moved, their eyes widening in shock. The silence that followed was deafening. "Elena," Julian said, his voice cracking. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was caught in a spotlight. I heard noises. I thought something was wrong. Marcus stood up slowly. He didn't look angry. He looked exposed. "Nothing is wrong, Elena. Go back to your room." But I didn't. Some dark, rebellious part of me wanted to stay. I wanted to understand this thing that was happening between us, this invisible force that was pulling the three of us closer than any siblings should ever be. "Why?" I whispered. "Why are we all acting so strange?" That was the moment the world shifted. Marcus looked at Julian, and a silent conversation passed between them, one of those twin moments that I had always been excluded from. "Come in, Elena," Julian said softly. "Close the door."
I did.
I stepped into the room and shut the door behind me, locking out the rest of the world. The atmosphere in that room was different from the rest of the house. It was charged, heavy with the weight of years of unspoken emotions and overprotective love that had curdled into something else. We sat on the bed together, just like we had 1,000 times before. But the distance between us was gone. "We've always protected you," Marcus said, his voice low. "Maybe too much." "We've spent our lives making sure no one else could get near you," Julian added, reaching out to take my hand. "But in doing that, we never realized we were the ones getting too close." I looked at them, my heart hammering. I knew what was happening. I knew that if we took another step, there was no going back. Our family, our history, our future, everything would be different. And yet, in that moment, I felt a strange sense of belonging. I felt like this was the inevitable conclusion of our intense, isolated lives. "Show me," I whispered. "Show me what you were watching. Show me what it means." The hours that followed are a blur of heat and shadows. We crossed a line that society had drawn in permanent ink. It was an exploration fueled by curiosity, by the strange, insular love we had cultivated, and by the absence of anyone else in our world. When the sun was high in the sky, we finally emerged. We went to the kitchen and made lunch as if nothing had happened. We talked about the weather. We laughed at the same jokes. But when our eyes met, there was a new language there. A secret that would bind us together forever and simultaneously set us apart from everyone else. For a while, things were better. The tension was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet intimacy. We were closer than ever. There were no more awkward silences, no more unspoken questions. We were a world of three, and for a 19-year-old girl, that felt like enough. But as the months turned into years, the weight of the secret began to pull at the seams of my life. I tried to date other men, but none of them could compete with the intensity of Marcus and Julian.
No one knew me like they did.
No one protected me like they did. But I also realized that I was living in a beautiful cage. Every time I looked at my brothers, I saw the line we had crossed.
I saw the taboo we had embraced.
The satisfying end, I thought I had found a life of total closeness, was actually a trap. I began to realize that boundaries aren't just there to restrict us, they are there to help us define who we are. By breaking those boundaries, I had lost my own identity. I wasn't Elena. I was a part of Marcus and Julian. One morning, 2 years later, I sat on that same terrace in Florence. I watched the sun rise over the hills, and I realized that I couldn't stay. If I stayed, I would never grow. I would never know what it was like to be loved by someone who didn't share my blood. I would never know a life that wasn't defined by a secret. I didn't tell them the truth about why I was leaving. I told them I wanted to study in London, that I needed to see the world. The day I left, Marcus and Julian stood at the airport, looking at me with that same protective love. But for the first time, I saw the sadness in their eyes, the realization that they had lost me the moment they had claimed me. "Will you be okay, little bird?" Julian asked. "I have to be," I said, hugging them both. As I walked toward the gate, I didn't look back. I live in London now. I have a life that is quiet, independent, and free of the heavy shadows of my youth. I talk to my brothers every week. We are still close, but the nature of that closeness has changed. We never talk about that summer. We never talk about the room with the locked door. It is a ghost that haunts our conversations, a silent passenger in our lives. My story isn't a fairy tale. It's a cautionary one. We think we want absolute closeness. We think we want to tear down every wall between us and the people we love. But some walls are there for a reason. They allow us to breathe. They allow us to be individuals. I still carry the guilt. I still blame myself for being the one to ask why. But I've also learned to forgive that 18-year-old girl. She was lonely, she was curious, and she was loved by two people who didn't know how to let her go. If there is a lesson in my story, it's this. Curiosity is a fire. It can keep you warm, or it can burn your house down. Before you cross a line, make sure you're ready to live on the other side of it forever. Because once you're there, you can never truly come home again. Thank you for listening to this chapter of my life. If this story touched you, or if you have your own secrets to share, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the edge of human experience. Until next time, stay safe and mind the boundaries.